in this roundtable, we would like to discuss, again, the impact that COVID had on procurement, especially sustainable procurement. Mostly focuses on direct and indirect impacts, but it would also be interesting to see if there are any mitigating measures that you can think of, maybe considerations in the tendering process itself or in the documents, specifications, award questions, or doing contract management we can talk about. I've created idea boards, but I think we're a wee bit of a smaller group than anticipated, so we can maybe just do the discussion as a group. But I will still put the links into the chat field, so you can put any notes and comments on idea board if you like. And before we start with the roundtable, though, I would briefly like to touch upon the Build Back Better. You've probably heard of it. So the notion of Build Back Better is really originated in the context of recovery and reconstruction from physical disasters. Now, that has an emphasis on making preventative investments to improve the resilience, so to then reduce the cost for any future disasters. Now, there hasn't been obviously a physical disaster for COVID-19, obviously impacted health, but it wasn't a tornado or a flood or anything like that. Yet the risk from returning just to the economy, to the previous patterns that we've had, are so high that and the opportunity to embrace a more sustainable recovery is very, very evident that it is relevant in this context, the Build Back Better. So just to give you a quick overview of where it all coming from, the OECD published a policy response to COVID-19, and for that was that the economic recovery from COVID-19 needs to be durable and resilient, and basically a return to business as usual, and then environmental destructive investments, patterns and activities that the world has previously employed must absolutely be avoided, because the global environmental emergencies such as the climate change and the biodiversity loss that we are facing could cause socially and economically damage that is far greater than that caused by COVID-19. So by that, we're looking at finding means of getting the economies and livelihoods quickly back, but not in a way that we might think, but we would have to put well-being and inclusiveness at the heart of any changes. And other key dimensions the OECD mentions are to include alignment with long-term emission reduction goals, factoring in resilience to climate impacts, slowing biodiversity loss, also fostering innovation that builds on lasting behaviour changes, and increasing resilience and circularity of supply chains. So with that OECD's report, we can clearly see that the well-being and inclusiveness, so the social aspect, is in the focus of it all. We then have also Scotland, the Scottish Government's response, which is that they announced targeted measures to build back a stronger, fairer and greener economy for the future of Scotland in the wake of coronavirus, and that includes several people-centred or employment-related measures, such as investing about £50 million to support youth employment, but also to embed foundation and graduate apprenticeships, and to extend the Fair Start Scotland services, and further introducing a transitioning training fund for anyone who's facing redundancy and unemployment in the sectors mostly affected. The other measures that include that SMEs it should be easier for SMEs to be competing for public sector contracts, so that affects obviously the procurement function, and also measures that invite leaders from businesses to work with senior civil servants to ensure that key Scottish Government policies maximise opportunities for the economic benefit. So that's then Scottish Government, and then there's also Zero Waste Scotland, who have commissioned an independent expert group, which is the decoupling advisory group, and they have detailed what they believe we can do to meet Scotland's economic, environmental and social needs to overcome COVID-19 and the climate crisis. So again, it's a highly focused on the climate crisis here. They have the key element here of switching to a circular economy, so making things last, minimizing waste and maximizing the value. And the group set out 3 key policy principles for using resources sustainably in this kind of well-being economy, so having people at its heart. First principle is that we recognize that green growth is not sufficient to build back better, and they recognize that clearly to this date we haven't really achieved the progress to ending the climate crisis, and we need to avoid a too strong focus on only environment and economy as growing in a green economy, because that fails to address the systematic social injustices, including the wealth inequality and the unequal access to essential services. So as a result, the green growth cannot alone be relied upon to deliver this well-being economy. The next principle, principle 2, is putting well-being at the heart of everything we do. And I quote, to create a truly well-being economy, we need to rethink and redesign the way our society functions. This means changing the way we work and live, from how we use energy and how we eat and produce food to how we travel and socialize. So clearly, so clearly here there is a factor again higher and further education sector can apply. We create environments that the students live in, and if we have a well-being at the heart of our institutions, the student community can live and feel this and take it forward into the future. Principle 3 is reducing Scotland's consumption of natural resources, and that is absolutely, rapidly, permanently and fairly. So reducing absolutely would be to be reducing the nation's amount of resources we use in absolute terms. Again, there's a circular economy to apply that across the public sector, and banning ecologically destructive products and industrial practices. To avoid that, and then reduce rapidly. So we urgently need to prioritize reducing our consumption and reducing permanently. So to look into achieving a collective well-being, long-term policies that must demonstrate that the impact is lasting. So to avoid the rebound effects within the policy-making process. And lastly, the reducing fairly. So we have to acknowledge that we import a lot of products that we consume, and we also export the waste. So exporting this means that we offshore or transfer or burden our mass consumption overseas. So we're taking our carbon emissions away to the countries who produce the goods for us or take our waste. So with that in mind, with the principles from Zero Waste Scotland, OECD's kind of call to create a well-being economy with inclusiveness and well-being at its heart. I think we need to consider these items when we look at mitigating measures within our sustainable procurement. So with that kind of overview, I want to get back to our roundtable to discuss those impacts now. So first of all, again, what do you think are the impacts that you might have felt during the last 6 months on sustainable procurement? I would just say, like, maybe raise your hand if you want to speak, and I'll get you up to speak. Or you can obviously, Jill, did you manage to share the? Okay, perfect. Or you can maybe put that on the web.
Yes, so the link is in the group chat box to the
perfect.
idea board.
And sometimes it helps to just refresh it if nothing shows up. But happy just to talk about it as well. We don't have to use the idea board as we're not as many people as anticipated. So any direct impacts that you could that have been quite evident, like any contracts that have been cancelled or not been taken forward at the time being. Do you generally feel that, so indirectly, that maybe there might be an impact in regards to as Kate mentioned earlier, that the weightings have reduced dramatically for sustainable procurement, that the emphasis is now more on cost and delivery rather than maybe where products are coming from, that fair working practices are aligned to, or community benefits. We have one comment here: direct impact in a delay in construction procurements. Yes. So do we feel that there is quite a heavy emphasis on construction not going forward or being too risky at this time of economic kind of stress?
Rika, can I just ask, if we want to add something, we just type it in and...
Yeah, sorry, yeah, you just add a sticky and then you just type it and then it appears to everyone, sorry. And you can also vote for anything that you want to kind of second. So instead of rewriting it, you just kind of vote for it by giving it a thumbs up, by clicking it and giving this a vote up.
In terms of the construction, there's been a delay, and actually that's useful for us in terms of the university is getting into more into sustainability and formulating our new sustainability strategy, and actually that allows us to put sustainable, because there's a pause on the project, it allows us to then add more sustainability into the project. It's always going to be very difficult when a project's already specified, but it just gives an opportunity there.
That's very good. Thank you very much, David. So you feel like you're being more involved because things have been delayed, and it gives you an opportunity to...
Not necessarily more involved, but it just gives us the opportunity.
Okay, excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
I think I would add to the construction that one of the things that I'm trying to flag as a risk at the moment is that projects that might have had tentative plans to go ahead and are now delayed, the longer you delay, they may be subject to the new biodiversity gain elements of the Environment Bill if that goes through, and that could add on a significant amount of cost, especially if you're in an urban area like I am. So it's...
Do you fear that things might be rushed then, just to avoid that?
I don't think they've even considered it. So I'm trying to raise the issue that, you know, you've got some plans in place that are fairly sustainable, but if you're told that you now have to spend 10% of your cost on biodiversity, you haven't planned for that. So, you know, waiting to ease cash flow might actually have a longer cost at the end of it.
Very true. And we also have another comment on indirect impact, so focus on speed of delivery at the impact of everything else. So just getting it in rather than considering quality and obviously quality of production methods. What are the areas that this is quite significant? Obviously, I guess PPE is an issue where things had to just get in rather than being considered where it's been made and how it's been made. Are there any other sectors where you felt that kind of happening apart from PPE?
Just to add, Rika, not actually still on PPE, I think just from a couple of recent discussions, you're right, there was a rush obviously to put a lot of orders in, but I think for us and maybe I think others, we've kind of getting more wary about potential I don't know, not necessarily scams, but things that are like bad quality products and the kind of that we're actually now want to try and make sure we're really looking at the right supply chains and using, you know, quite reputable like framework agreements or kind of, you know, organizations to buy through. So I think that's kind of raised because there has been quite a burst of kind of, you know, these maybe new companies or new products that maybe we're realizing are not right or not the kind of the quality that we need. So, we've maybe taken a step back a little bit and want to assess more, making sure things are coming through appropriate routes that we're buying. So I guess going forward, that's kind of positive.
Very good, thank you. So lessons learned basically from potential misprocurement by just trying to get it in. Very good, yeah. Which I think is always a good good impact at the end of the day, to have learned from it and making adjustments. Are there any adjustments in regards to the tendering process, or the tendering of the specification that you started to make, or within contract management, that is relating to sustainable procurement, to kind of mitigate the impacts that you might have felt during COVID-19, or trying to avoid? Are you including any new KPIs potentially to track things, or did you start putting new kind of specifications in instead of award criteria?
I can say just, just a simple example, for example, just talking about like hand sanitizer. This is maybe an area where we're kind of, there's a nice kind of happy sort of alliance between the sort of financial kind of impact and sustainability, because we're looking at, trying to buy in bulk and kind of refilling this just sort of, bottles around campus, rather than so we buy, I don't know what is 5 litre kind of the sort of bulk hand sanitizer, and we try to make sure that when we're around across campus, if departments are kind of given small bottles, they make sure they kind of come back for refills, or are kind of the sort of facilities team are making sure the things get refilled, rather than just keeping buying more and more plastic bottles, basically. So obviously that's financially beneficial to us, as well as there's sustainability benefit. So that's kind of a really kind of quite nice little tangible example where the two things meet, and it's it's good for us, and it's good for the kind of bigger environmental picture as well.
Excellent, thank you very much. Anyone else?
I was just going to say we're supporting a project at the moment through the Circular Economy Business Support Service with the NHS around refill stations. As a company who's doing kind of refills on hand sanitizers, so I could link you with them. There's an SME who's providing a service. And the other thing I was going to mention was furniture, but I see that Jamie from RIPE is doing a talk, so I won't steal his thunder, but I think there's a lot of opportunities there with repurposing excess furniture stock and redeploying it elsewhere, but I'm sure you'll be talking about that. They're the ones that I've come up with, and the other ones, because we've been looking at this, the Green Recovery Programme around PPE, are always looking for opportunities for reuse, and we're working with the NHS on that. One thing I've come across, which I'm hoping to get a solution to, is reusable face masks. At the moment, it seems that after they've reached the end of life, some of the kind of key recyclers like Nathan's Waste Savers are not actually recycling them at the moment. They're being burnt, so that's obviously not ideal. So that's a future area to look at in terms of trying to find a market for recycling cloth masks. So obviously that's leading to impacts. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Claire.
Claire,
so they will. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask a follow-up to Claire on that. Just about the textile recycling. I know of quite a few of the big retailers are doing sort of textile recycling where, for any type of textiles in any sort of condition, places like, I think, like H&M, Primark, I think they're doing quite big, obviously mainly targeted to consumers, but is there any partnerships between organisations and retailers? Like, I don't know if that's something that's, anything about or is being explored.
Yeah, no, I don't really, but I can certainly ask Anna Graham, who's our textiles researcher. She's in post there, so I could ask her that question. Ask her to come back to you, Kate, on that. She's been doing a whole piece on clothing at the moment, actually. So yeah, I can ask her. She would know. Yeah, okay, make it all. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. We have another posted here under direct impacts. So generally, buying less as budgets have been reduced, absolutely. and the travel budget has been halved for all schools and units, which obviously has a positive direct impact in regards to travelling, in the sense of emissions through travel. Budget cuts obviously are not always helpful, because sustainable products that last longer might be more expensive upfront. Is there anything that maybe potentially discussions have been going on internally, where budgets have been taken to buy sustainable products over the cheaper option, or is that more or less still a vision for the future? That might be too open of a question here.
I would say it's definitely a vision for the future, in that we need to get into procurement processes and look at life cycle analysis as part of the purchase, but it's early days yet.
Out of interest, I know you had a lot of training on life cycle costing in the past. As an organisation, do you use life cycle costing, adopt it as standard now in your procurement process?
So across the collaborative team, we don't use it as a standard, unfortunately. I think it is often still quite hard for all the products that we have within within the basket of a framework agreement. It would probably be too hard to have to find out the different impacts of the cost for every single product. I know we had on the AV contract, we tried to have a life cycle costing, including consumption of energy, etc. But that was a very onerous task, and ideally we would have that, because I would inform the procurement departments of where to actually make the purchase or include that into their considerations. But we need to, I think there needs to be more work in how to do it for different areas, and I think there will be some work coming out in the future as well, from like a collaboration between all the different sectors in Scotland. But ideally it would be more open and visible. We just need to be careful that we don't stress the suppliers at time of framework agreement too much, simply because they don't get any benefit from it directly, because it's obviously not a contract with a monetary value attached against it at that point. But obviously institutions are always invited, and it's always recommended to do life cycle costing, maybe a time of call off. So if a mini competition is being done, then we would say try to integrate the life cycle impact costing, absolutely. What are the areas or that you feel, whilst there has obviously been quite a bit of emission reduction, if we're thinking about climate change through the limited travelling, but there obviously have been products that have been bought in, like the sanitizers or the face masks and the visors and all of that. Where do you think is the greatest environmental impact at the moment that universities have to face and deal with in regards to buying any products due to COVID-19? Like packaged food, for example, that obviously has an impact as well.
The immediate one is that we have all our students in halls, and the catering provision is now, we're delivering catering to the students. We're using vegware for the packaging for that.
Good.
But the volumes are phenomenal, and all of our halls of residents now have daily pickups of their bins, and the vegware is going to waste, to general waste, because we don't have any local composting. So we're beginning to look at, now the volumes are sufficient, we're beginning to look at getting vegware collections, which are more expensive, but vegware will come and then take them back to their composter. But that's been a huge change, is that we have a large number of bins. We then also have the bins for COVID isolation as well. So we need yet another set of bins for the COVID isolation, to keep stuff 72 hours before it then goes into the waste stream. But yeah, as an impact of things that we have bought that that is, so the delivery of food to our students has been a biggie. We've gone from trayless, having plates that get washed, to having fair trade, having containers that are getting thrown away.
It does feel like going back 10 years and all the good work that everyone has been doing is kind of out of the window because of all of this, which is a shame, absolute shame. We just hope that we can go back to the way it was at some point, even if it needs to be a bit, changed a bit. Probably won't be 100% the way it was before, obviously, and it shouldn't be. With the Build Back Better notion, of course, we should try to find new ways, better ways of finding, and that includes behaviour change. And people do have to work with lots of behaviour change just now, and hopefully that will increase into more of a sustainable future for everyone. Can anyone else think of any direct or indirect impacts in regards to COVID-19 on their procurement processes? Do you feel like it's more of it's been busier for the procurement teams? And do you think that sustainability generally has taken a back foot? Just as a general comment, do you just get the general idea it's had to step back a little bit, or do you think it's unchanged? Or maybe for people who are working with the procurement teams as like sustainability advisors, do you feel the door is more open for sustainability right now, or do you think it's been closed a little bit? People don't want to necessarily talk about it as much.
I was going to say, we produced some guidance on picking up what you were talking about before. We produced some guidance to encourage reuse again, because we've noticed a massive increase in single-use disposables across the board. So I'm happy to share that kind of guidance. It's just to give people confidence that it's okay to start, using contactless approach to reusable coffee cups, etc., and to move away from single-use catering packaging. One positive thing I would say, because I was doing some, I was just redeployed recently and I've just come back onto ProCirc. I was working to help to support some background research for the Single-Use Plastics Directive. I did look at the data for APUC with Louise Levin, was very helpful with that as well. And one positive thing I would say is I noticed that there has been a really big switch in the universities and colleges sector compared to other sectors to more sustainable single-use packaging items. There's definitely a real marked change there. The one thing I would warn about is bioplastics, because they do fall within potential future market restrictions. They're included there. So to sort of look at kind of other items like wooden based items, or which of course you do have, but just to sort of think about that for the future, that they do fall under the scope of future market restrictions. But yeah, compared to some other sectors like schools, where there's just been an exponential explosion in plastic cutlery and everything's wrapped, and because there's no dishwashing function, I think that's one of the problems. That's what I've noticed, is this explosion in plastic packaging. But comparatively, universities and colleges are not as bad as some sectors, but yeah. It's really positive. Yeah.
Thanks, Claire.
One thing that I think might happen is we might see a sort of renewed focus on occupational health and safety. There seems to be quite a lot coming out about that, and of course it's a really fundamental sort of right to have at work, but it sometimes gets not as much focus as sort of things like working hours or kind of forced labor issues or things like that. So we have in contract management asked some of our suppliers about kind of how they're implementing occupational health and safety, for the COVID age. So that might be something that we see sort of renewed, interest in. is certainly something I'm thinking about and how we can integrate it.
One of the areas that I'd been looking at immediately before the lockdown was a program of replacing a lot of the paper towel dispensers with hand dryers. And even although official HSE guidance says, as long as you're drying your hands, be it by paper towel or be it by hand dryer, they're not specifically saying hand dryers are a bad thing. There's still a lot of preconceptions that hand dryers will spread the virus because it's blowing air around, although HSE guidance says it's absolutely fine to use the hand dryers, but that entire project at the moment has been sort of put on hold. I'm doing some background prep work of just getting numbers and locations, but compared to the number of paper towels, after doing a quick procurement check of what we actually bought last year, looking at it solely from a waste point of view, it's a massive constituent of our general waste stream, which was the reason I was looking at eliminating it if possible, or massively reducing it by a program of replacements. But as I say, at the moment, the feeling is that it would just be met with such a wave of opposition that it's best to put that on hold until we progress a little bit further and we've got a bit more information, and maybe some of the fears have calmed down a little bit. The PR from doing a switch like that at the moment doesn't feel like it's the right time.
Thanks very much, Scott. I think that's very interesting as well. The confusion about what to do, what's the right thing to do, and advice changing all the time as well. It's very hard to plan for that. And I acknowledge that. I mean, we're all trying to just do our best.
So, for instance, we have turned off all of our automatic hand dryers. We have turned off all our water coolers, and we do not do keep cup anymore, and so it's been a huge rollback on everything.
Such a shame, I know.
And it's very weird that there's no consistency across the sector as well. So that everyone's making their own, but everyone makes their own risk assessments. But we're ending up with diverse solutions.
Especially with fear that you can't really do anything right. It's like often you try to implement something and then it's kind of wrong on some level. So I think this is just completely a situation we've never been in before, and we hopefully don't have to see ourselves in again. Important, just to round it up, is adaptation, finding ways of building back better as per the guidance, and collaborating where we can and sharing information. Important is that, you know, there might be really good ideas and projects out there, and it would be very helpful for the whole sector if we can share this, lessons learned, best practice, and I know AUC is a very good area where we can just share this information with on the Sustainability Exchange. So, and there's lots of information already out there, so I would always say, like, have a look again for any information. There's also, I think, guidance on how to communicate and engage with different departments as well, which is also helpful if anyone struggles with that. So thanks very much for your input. I really appreciate it. It's a difficult topic and difficult to talk about, and I will just go back to Kate. If anyone has any other comments, please just feel free to use the idea board to populate it a little bit more. Thank you.
Thanks, Rika. That was great. That was really interactive and interesting discussion. Some of the hopefully in our kind of follow up, the minutes and on the website we'll share some of the links and the information that we were talking about there, so everyone will have access to that. I am going to pass over now to David Stutchfield for an update from St Andrews University on the Scope 3 emissions project. And we have, after this, we'll have a break about 11ish. So David, I will pass the floor over to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Right, helps to unmute. So thanks very much. So I'm the Sustainability Manager at the university, and I'll just share my screen, just check this is working okay, and share that one. Share. And
yeah, that's working great, David.
Is that working okay now? Yep.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so I just want to run through the procurement emissions project that we were done. So we've used HESCET, the standard HESCET tool through APOC, and that's looked at our through our capital projects, and just running through our financial reports, you can see that capital projects are 52% of our carbon footprint. So this is just taking our standard ledger and running it through Spitz-Cavell and then running it through the HESCET tool, and it's showing the majority of this carbon footprint for this year was capital projects. So we're wanting to look at a bit more detail on that and see what we can drill down on. And we were looking at, okay, well, let's start off with the embodied carbon. So the thing we know everything about is the operational carbon, the building energy consumption. We've got all our meters and so on. And what can we do for the manufacture and transport and installation of construction materials? So we looked at what the methods were, and we decided to pick a single project. So we're working with a MSc student from the School of Management of Edinburgh University, and she did her MS thesis on us, and we were a participant on it. And we were looking at what methods how do we choose the appropriate calculation method for purchase goods. And so we went through this decision tree, and her MSc thesis was the comparison of the spend-based method with the average data method, with the hybrid method, and the supplier-specific method. So this presentation is about what we found. So we just took a single project that we had done, which was a £10 million project, and just tried to understand what the carbon outcome was from all the different ways that we could calculate that. And so all of the data was ours, but the student then worked through that and did a really good job of that. So taking a simple spend-based method, we went to the through the design team. So this was a building that had just been completed and commissioned, but we went back to the bill of quantities. So so the sum of the value was £10.3 million. If you apply a simple DEFRA emission factor for construction of capital projects, then the emissions of that building were 5.7 thousand tons of carbon. So that's a starting point. So that's just a straightforward, okay, we've gone one better than HESCET. We've actually broken this out, and we've taken that spend and put a DEFRA factor against that. So we then looked at drilling down on the bill of quantities. So this is just the bill of quantities that is produced for every single project, and is looking at so it's where the project team estimate what the costs are going to be based on the designs, and that is then broken down in more detail there. So we can see that we've got 0.32 tons of straight bars and 0.48 tons of steel, high yield steel, and so this spreadsheet is a huge spreadsheet for the whole project, and was shared with the student for her to do then the analysis on it. So she started looking at the ICE database tool and going through from each of these on a spend-based process. And you're not supposed to read this table, but it's basically, there were a lot of elements. She went through every single element and looked at the quantity, and there was a lookup table that then gave us the embodied carbon for that. So she's gone through every single element in that building based on the bill of quantities and worked out what the overall carbon was there for that. So the summary of that process then is that steel was 70% of the total emissions of the project, concrete was 15%, glass was 3%, and then everything else was below 3% there. And so we even know by, if you're taking it down to sheet galvanized, reinforcement, stainless, and then the different types of concrete. So that's showing that within this particular construction type, then steel was by far the greatest carbon. So the other alternative method is a supplier-specific method, and that's using the environmental product declaration. So all of the major construction projects products we use have a environmental product declaration. So Kingspan have done a cradle to grave life cycle assessment on their products and can give you a carbon factor for their products as an example there. So this is the detail of the product declaration. There's a lot of information there, but the figure we're using is the 44.6, which is the top left corner there. So that's saying for this product, which is 40 mil thick, wherever you use this product, then the embodied carbon is 44.6 kilograms of CO2. So the student then worked out, okay, how much of that insulation was in the project, and did a comparison between the supplier-based specific and the average data methods. So from the average data, you can see from the ICE database, you can see that we had 9.32 kilograms, so tons of CO2 from the total by breaking down it into insulation and steel. But actually, from the environmental product declaration for Kingspan, that's actually higher. So that's 14.2. So the more granularity you get on the accuracy, then we were getting, we installed Kingspan and it had a declared embodied factor of 44.6 per cubic meter, and that's the elemental stuff. So we were doing this comparison between the two methods of how we could calculate the carbon for this building. So obviously the supplier specific is the more accurate because it's based on the product that we install through. So one of the outcomes of that was that it required the contractor to collect the energy performance, environmental performance declaration for all of the material suppliers. But it was a nightmare for us to try and do that as a retrofit. So having to go back and think about it, it was really, really difficult. So one of the key outcomes was that we do need to specify this at the beginning of the project, but that actually only large contractors will have sufficient experience to be able to do that. And there may be an additional cost. So it was interesting that the head of procurement of the contractor said, it has to be a mandatory requirement. The contractor can do it, they just have to ask. So we have to specify that. And actually, we specify BREEAM for all of our buildings. We have to have BREEAM Excellent as our minimum standard. To do that, they need to look at all the elements of the building and against the Green Construction Guide. So there is a lot of work that the contractors are building into that. So when they're doing a BREEAM construction for us, they know about this and they can price in the extra work that they're going to have to do, because you end up with huge amounts of certification that goes to the BREEAM assessor to prove that what you've put in is actually the right product. So that was that was an interesting one from us, that the suppliers are saying, yeah, we can do that, just no one ever asks. And it actually is that's the time the contractor needs to be able to, as he's preparing all of his specifications for BREEAM, he just then, his BREEAM assessor can then do, internal BREEAM assessor can then pull all together the EPDs for all of the products and pull this together. So that was a sort of a learning point for us there. Within the construction, there are also the contractor's scope 1 emissions. So scope 1 and 2 emissions, so they're direct emissions. So this contractor had also provided had done all the analysis, but because part of a BREEAM actually also requires you to do that, and was able to then give us that information. So we go from the electricity, the fuel, and the transportation of construction materials. So they'd logged, where did you come, when you went to the site, they said, where have you come from, how did you get here, how many miles was it? And they have these big registers, and as you visit construction sites, you get that all the time. Well, actually that data is collected and is looked at. So you have the embodied carbon of the products that they're using, and then we have the direct emissions. The actual, as you can see from that number being a lot less than the 5,000 overall assessment, then it's a small figure. So direct emissions are important, but not highly significant. So we looked at the two processes and realized we couldn't do the whole analysis on supplier specific. So we needed to have a hybrid method. So we went for a hybrid method and had the two parts from bottom up and top down, and ended up with an estimate then of 7,062 tons. So in a comparison then, we've just used a spend-based method. We said we spent 10 million times a carbon factor equals 5.7 million. We then went through 3 months of detailed analysis work and came up with 7,000 tons. So what that's telling me is that the spend-based method is in the ballpark. It's in the same, it's there, but there is a difference. So that in general, there is a increase from that process. So we've looked at the calculation method, all of the calculation methods for a single project, and we found that the hybrid approach is the most practical for a project specifically in St Andrews, because this outcome is only for the project we did in St Andrews with the type of construction we did in St Andrews. More resolution leads to higher emissions, but all calculations were in the same ballpark. So we learned that it's hard to do this retrospectively. There was a significant resource that was needed, and this needs to be specified at the start of the project. For a traditional construction building in the central belt, it may well be that spend-based methods are okay, and obviously more research would need to be done on that. And spend-based methods are so it's just saying that we all always say that spend-based methods are grossly inaccurate, and you spend more on a higher if you spend more on a energy efficient product, then your carbon emissions go up. But actually, it's doing the granularity allows you to then look at, actually, if we were to reduce the steel, and is there any part of that steel work that we can make a timber frame? Or can we reduce the amount of concrete in the building? That's where we can actually show that the embodied carbon is going to be reduced. So 70% of all of our carbon from that building is the steel work. That's a big figure. So when we go back and we design a new building, we can then say, let's look at this building. Okay, and we can ask the architect when they're giving us the stage 0 options appraisals of how we're going to build this building, and it would allow for just going for a timber frame would phenomenally change the building, or a conventional brick and block type construction may be better than a steel frame. Obviously, there are other issues like speed of construction and ability to get on site, but it was from an embodied carbon point of view, that's interesting. We have just had approved a net carbon zero target of 2035, including all of our scope 3 emissions. So that's hot off the press, and we still are not releasing that yet. We're doing a lot of work on our sustainability strategy, but that's the effect of that would be that we are going to need to do some offsetting at some point. And we're looking at what offset price we would be putting in against that. But it also means that for this building, for your 7,000 tons, then if we can drastically reduce depending on what the carbon price we use is, that actually if a timber frame, for instance, or a straw bale frame was more expensive, that actually we would have to pay less offsets from our procurement. So it actually assists that process that we can go through. So those are the sort of questions that we're beginning to look at. And the key questions going forward are, how can we improve the carbon data and build these into our baseline reporting across the sector? So if we as St Andrews start saying, actually, our carbon footprint is 23,000 tons, or even higher now, so we think that if you add all of our travel emissions and our student commuting emissions and our student travel from home emissions, then we're up about 60,000 tons. So if the university puts in 60,000 tons as our carbon footprint, and we've used a specific method for from the procurement side, what is the equivalence with anyone else's other universities' footprints? And are we just inflating the whole process? So how can Scottish Procurement and APOC take the lead and make sure that it's all standard? So the sustainable procurement duties and the climate change reporting duties should go hand in hand and pull that together. So that last slide is the same slide as I presented at the last procurement workshop, and I thought I don't need to change the slide. So it's because it's just a series of questions. So anyway, that's where we are. Any questions?
Not a question, just a comment. That's really good. Like, this is really amazing to see that difference and your conclusions. So thank you very much for that. That's really good. I'll come back to you on that, David, by the way.
That's okay.
That was a really, really great presentation, David. It was really, really interesting. Yeah, no, I really want to share your, it's recorded, isn't it? So I really want to share it with some colleagues like Michael and Rami, who are doing quite a lot of work around sort of Scope 3 emissions and looking at it themselves as well, because your example's probably kind of the furthest evolved I've seen, where you've taken a deep dive into actually trying to build up, ground up, working with suppliers to build up actual emissions data. So it was really, really interesting. Yeah.
I mean, one thing I would like to do is actually take a project and try it and just find out how much would a contractor charge extra for providing carbon data.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And even if we can prove that it's actually not a lot, then building that into as a employer's requirement into all future tenders.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. It's really, really good. What I can do is also share your example with partners as well, because I think Camp C in Belgium probably also looked at this approach as well. So I can see share with others who've practiced this approach as well, and I can ask that question as well. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I know that SciSEF are looking at this, so that's like the big energy companies, Scottish Water, and the airports and Transport Scotland all want to go to the private sector collectively to ask for this information in a standard form. So yeah, I can share that, the work that you've done with that group as well.
Yeah, that's true. It might be really, really good to present to that forum in the future, because I'm on that forum as well. I think that would be really, really good topic to present, David, and then you could get their opinions and feedback on that as well, because that's something that they all want to look at as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have used the acronym. It's the Scottish Infrastructure Circular Economy Forum.
Yeah, Scottish Circular Economy Infrastructure Forum. Yeah.
It's led by Ecom.
Okay, great. If there are any more questions or any more comments on David's presentation before we move to the break? We'll have time later if anything crops up and you want to add anything.
I do have a very minor point. Coming from previous experience within the construction industry, which is quite useful for sort of the poacher turn gamekeeper elements, particularly around transport, both of personnel and materials to site. For contractors, that was always an incredibly difficult one to accurately capture. 9 times out of 10, it heavily depends on how good your gatesman at the site office is and how willing they are to actually physically stop anyone entering until they've given an accurate figure. Working on the environmental side in construction before, there was often the case of I'd come to collect the data, and on the vast majority of sites, it wasn't worthwhile putting in an electronic entry, as in an iPad at the entrance, so you'd pop in your data. So it was paper forms. And the boxes would very often maybe have the delivery company name, but the actual mileage would be blank, or it would be a complete finger in the air estimate, which was wildly inaccurate, which meant that the construction company ended up having to go back and look up, okay, so this supplier is supplying this material that's coming from this warehouse in this location, therefore it's this many miles multiplied up by however many journeys. And that's heavily dependent as well on how much the contractor knows there's going to be scrutiny of the data. So I think from a client point of view, asking to see that data will automatically make the contractors much more likely to more accurately measure it and report it back, rather than providing at the end of the project sort of, well, this was the total transport emission number. No, we haven't provided you the data set because you haven't asked for it. So increased scrutiny, I think, will definitely help. Sort of push that one as just be aware you are going to be marked. And similarly, waste data, high level reports at the end saying, we had this many tons of general waste, this much in recycling. Asking to see the sort of breakdown of that information from a client's point of view would certainly increase the likelihood that contractors are going to more accurately record rather than using estimates. I mean, generally speaking, the data would be there in the ballpark, but to get better quality data, knowing that there's going to be scrutiny on a client side, I think would definitely help going forward. So building that into the contract and making it clear is vital.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Scott. I think we can probably move toward the break now if everyone's had the chance to comment and ask questions. I would suggest it's just coming up for 11 now, so we're just about 10 minutes over, but I think we still have plenty of time after the break for presentation from Jamie at Ripe Office, who's joined us. Thanks, Jamie. So I'd suggest, if it's okay, Jamie, with you, we'll start your presentation 11:20, and we should have plenty of time for that and comments and questions.
That sounds good.
That works.
Okay, just before we go on the break, can I ask a question? Because I recently gave a presentation to Zero Waste Scotland, and did other people see that presentation? Because if they did, then I will probably reframe it, because the one that I'm planning to deliver has some similarities. So maybe if you've seen it, or you can do some sort of Zoom reaction or something, so I can think about how to reshape the session.
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, cool, Andy. All right.
I haven't. No. So yeah, you can put a thumbs up if you've seen the presentation already. I'm assuming Claire from Zero Waste Scotland, you may have seen that presentation already.
Poor old Claire. Seen it a few times.
No, I'm very supportive.
Is there anyone else on the call that's seen that, or is it quite new to? Is it new to everybody, and therefore, Jamie, you can keep your presentation as is?
Sorry, Andy. Sorry, Claire.
May just be 2 people then that we've got that have seen the presentation before. So I think it'll be, yeah, great. I'm looking forward to seeing that. New to Alexis as well. Great. Okay. So if we take it, 11:10. So if we take a 10-minute break, come back at 20 past. That's great. Thanks. See you then. I will just give it another minute or two just till people come back online. Then we can get started. Okay, so I think most people are back now. I know everyone doesn't have their video on, but that's fine. So just before I introduce Jamie, just to say a couple of words on the kind of the kind of idea, the background to having Jamie along. Some of you that were at the last Topic Support Network, I think back in March or April, may have heard Camp C, who came to give a presentation on circular office and a project they were doing on building a new office space and using circular economy principles. That was a really, really interesting presentation and lots of ideas and discussion. And so we kind of wanted to kind of keep the sort of theme of circular economy going in the kind of following TSNs, because there's a lot of, you know, great companies and organizations that are doing work in this area. And some of you may kind of already know a bit about the ProCirc project that Zero Waste Scotland is very involved in, along with a number of kind of partners across the EU. And that's looking at kind of circular economy and procurement. So that's kind of sort of big project that's kind of really interesting. If you want to know more about it, there's a whole section on Zero Waste Scotland's website about it. We can share some information, links. But now, yeah, for today we've got really exciting presentation. So Jamie, no, I haven't heard your presentation before, so I'm really excited to hear about it. So we're looking more, so we're looking at furniture and circular economy in this presentation. So we've got Jamie Harbour as the relationship manager at Ripe Office, yeah, that's right, not who focus on kind of remanufacturing, repurposing office furniture. If I've got that correct, Jamie, you'll explain a lot better about the kind of work that you do, but I'll pass over to you now and we'll hear all about it. So great, thanks very much.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for your time, everyone, and thanks for inviting me into this conversation. It's a real privilege. I'm just going to get my presentation up. Excuse me. Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, that's great, Jamie.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. So, correct, I do work for a company called Ripe Office. We are a circular economy office furniture company, but we also work with a network of amazing other circular economy providers. I think potentially the value that I can bring to the conversation, and this conversation, is one, to reinforce the importance of the FF&E side of buildings and taking a sensible approach towards the way that you manage your offices and also waste as well. I think my other incentive is to try and get you to do away with the notion that buying new is an essential part of fitting out an office. And I think I also want to provide a perspective for an SME and a supplier about some of the kind of the barriers and the enablers which will help you to get a circular and low carbon and sustainable space. So I think that's kind of broadly where the presentation is aimed at. And I was really glad that David, through his presentation, touched upon net zero and particularly the 2040 target that you guys have at St Andrews, because I wanted to touch upon that, and because I think there's some interesting conversation here around net zero as well. The way that we begin is normally in terms of the thinking about sustainability, partly by virtue of where people come from in terms of their training, but also more broadly, the conversations around sustainability, in my experience, in a facilities management context, normally relate to either how you kind of construct buildings or how you run it from an energy performance perspective. And I think for us, what we wanted to get across is there's a broader suite of things that we should be talking about. And the way, probably the entry point that we have to that conversation is this graph here, which was done by a professor of embodied energy, a guy called Dr. Graham Trelaw. I'm sure that David, through his fantastic presentation earlier and his carbon accounting, will have some thoughts on it. But it was a really interesting piece of research, right? And essentially looked to quantify the greenhouse gas emissions of a commercial building over its 40-year life. And instinctively, what you think if the question was, where are the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions over a building's 40-year life? You would be thinking about the operational energy, either things that keep the HVAC systems running, or the lights on, or you think it would be the shell and core of the building. What was quite interesting about this research, and I can share the peer-reviewed paper and talk about any of the assumptions if you're interested in. What was quite interesting and counterintuitive about this research was that actually the single biggest source of emissions was furniture. And then if you add that up with the other bits of the kind of Cat B fit out, that added up to a whopping 42% of the overall carbon footprint of the building. This is, again, very kind of counterintuitive, but in essence, if we're looking at why, the real reason here is because whereas you build the building once, you cycle the things in the building in and out over and over again. And although, for example, the fit out obviously is going to be a much smaller footprint than the shell and core of the building that you build once, aggregated over the life of the building, particularly with the increasing cycle of an increasing rate that fast fashion is determining we need to throw things away and bring things back into the building, that really, really adds up. And so my point here is not to say, look, don't take energy efficiency seriously. It's not to sort of negate the importance of important building management. But the key thing here is also to say, we need to have a strategic conversation. We need to think more broadly about the way that we buy and the way that we run the spaces in which we're situated. Now, so at the outset as well, and through the introduction, I was described as I work for a sort of a circular economy office furniture company, and I want to delve into what that means a bit more, because whereas we are a circular economy office furniture company, we also work with a network of amazing other circular economy providers. So I'm just going to explain a bit more about what that means in practice. Okay, so this is essentially our business model. We are based around the fact that, you know, at the start, we understand customers' requirements. So the way that we do that practically is that we have a team of trained interior designers and architects that can work either collaboratively with outsourced interior designers and architects that you're working with, or we can do it ourselves, and we do that for free. We then begin to source we begin to source secondhand furniture as a feedstock for our circular economy processes. We can do that from your existing stock, so we can do that from the site itself and existing offices, or we can do that from the secondhand market. In the UK, we send 75,000 tonnes of office furniture to landfill every year. That equates to 300 tonnes every working day. There's a huge amount out there. And also from the perspective of a company like us, it's very, very easily accessible, and we don't have to charge a lot to do it. We also make new furniture from waste streams and waste sources as well. The MTIB here refers to the Mathematical Institute for the Blind, who I'm going to address a little bit later and talk a bit more about. Once we've got a second-hand item of furniture, we remanufacture it. For us, that's a quality-controlled engineering process. We break it down to its constituent parts and then remake it as new, so it both looks and performs as new. That is, as I said, and to reiterate, a quality-controlled engineering process. It's something that, you know, Caterpillar have been doing for a long time on engines, and Ricoh have been doing it for a long time for printers. If it can work for a tank, it can work for a desk chair. It's not that complicated, but we do take a lot of pride in terms of the engineering processes we put into it, and have an ex-aerospace manufacturing manager running our facility to do that. We do all of that in the UK, and with a real kind of set of quality controls. We transport and install the furniture ourselves, and every item of furniture we sell comes with a guaranteed take back. We would be a terrible circular business if we didn't want the items we sell back after its first life, so we can work on them over and over again. That's an integral part of most circular businesses, and also really de-risking. It makes it easy to facilitate innovative forms of financing like leasing, etc. as well. That's something that is a key part of what we do, and I know what a range of other suppliers do as well. So like I said, that's kind of our circular model, but it's broadly shared by a range of other suppliers, which I'm going to talk about a bit further down the line in terms of the presentation as well. The next logical question here is like, does a remanufactured item actually result in something that looks and performs as new, or are you just going to clean it down and sell me a second-hand chair? The answer is unequivocally it's the former. So here, just to sort of display that, the chair on the left, this is just an indicative example. We've remanufactured thousands of different models of chairs over the course of our existence. The chair on the left is the remanufactured one. The one on the right is the new one. The one there, you can see visually that they're exactly the same. The only difference is that we messed up the photo shoot and got the arms the wrong way around because they're telescopic arms. Apart from that, they're exactly the same and they perform exactly the same. The differences, however, begin when you look at pricing. So this is 20 to 30% lower than framework prices. What that means in reality is this is a 768 quid chair new at list price, and we sell them for 160 to 210 pounds. So you're looking at really, really significant discounts. It has an 8% reduced environmental footprint. It's made in the UK, so it can create real meaningful community jobs. And it's a high scorer for WELL, BREEAM, LEED and SCAR as well. Although I haven't put SCAR in here because I realised that lots of people don't really care about SCAR anymore. We can provide the same warranty as new items and there are large volumes available. Just as a kind of example of what large volumes means, we signed a contract for 3,000 of these from Goldman Sachs, which we can remanufacture to as new using, for example, the same mechanical polisher that Orange Box used in the original process as well. And if we have to powder coat, our powder coat is often better than the original equipment manufacturers as well. I think for me, one of the interesting things about the circular economy as well is when circularity is combined with innovative and interesting product design. We're starting to do that a bit around, actually quite extensively in a number of different ways. So thank you. Yeah. So the item on the left is a remanufactured Vitra desk frame, and on the top is a board made from post-consumer waste plastic. That's kitchen chopping boards and black plastic wrapping, shredded, heated and squished into a board. That is made by an amazing company called Smart Plastics, who are designing a whole range of furniture with and collaboratively. And again, the chairs surrounding the meeting table are remanufactured as well. The image on the right is a prototype. So this is hot off the press, and actually, unless you went to the other presentation I gave, no one has ever seen before. This is a sofa that we're working on. We are modestly calling this one the most sustainable sofa in the world. It has a frame made from post-consumer waste plastic. Fillings are all natural materials. The upholstery is recycled. The zips are made from ocean plastic. And the stitching which is used in the upholstery is dissolvable by a heat gun, so you can take a heat gun over it, and then you can pull it apart, and you can rewash it and use it again. It's modular and will be sold with a carbon offset and a buyback offer as well. So the point is that when we think about circular economy, we normally think about just taking something that had a previous life back to as new. The reality is that the advances in circular economy thinking, both in the furniture sector, but across a broader suite of furnishings, are such that you can not only make something as new, you can make it better than new as well, which is quite kind of interesting. I want to now touch upon a point that I think sort of, David referenced in his presentation around net zero. And for me, this is, an incredibly important process and something for us to think about collectively. And why is the conversation about net zero so time sensitive and so important? And why am I, as a small SME circular economy furniture provider, raising that in this conversation with you guys who are managing large estates? For me, the reason why it's so important is it's because it's so time sensitive. One, by time sensitive, what I mean is that, obviously we don't have much time to act to save the planet, but also time sensitive because the narrative over what constitutes net zero will change. And I think, as David alluded to as well, the boundaries of what constitutes net zero have not yet been defined. So what we need as a sector, what we need as people who care about the planet, is to drive a progressive and advanced form of version of net zero. Sector-specific approaches are inevitable. The fact is that you guys are your universities, and what net zero means for you is going to be different to anyone else. And that point is, you're going to have to exercise thought leadership in that process as well. The potential for greenwash is absolutely enormous. You know, I put in here a reference to this advertising campaign that VW came up with just before the Dieselgate scandal. Diesel has really cleaned up this act. The point is that if we get this wrong, it's going to be incredibly damaging. Not just again for the planet, but also more broadly for the way that we conceptualize and think about these issues more broadly, and the reputational impact for organizations, particularly with an increasingly activist student body, is going to be quite dire. And the reason I'm potentially raising this, and this links to kind of the next slide here, is that, you know, for me, the key battleground around net zero, and to use a kind of well-worn, crude fighting analogy, is going to be around the definition of what constitutes a hard to decarbonize emission. David alluded to the fact that there's going to be some offsets necessary, but the point is that we're only going to be meant to offset things that are actually genuinely hard to decarbonize. And for me, what would be a tragic waste and a tragic shame is if we're thinking about the spaces in which we're situated, everyone buys everything new and then offsets it, right? Because that is deemed to be a hard to decarbonize emission. And I think if there's one thing that I want to leave as part of this presentation, is that the capability of the market to deliver is absolutely enormous, and you don't need to buy new anymore. And buying new does not, particularly in the office furniture and furnishings context, does not constitute hard to decarbonize emission. And just to kind of encapsulate that and make that a bit more real for you, the point is that there is an amazing array of suppliers out there. Obviously, we work in terms of furniture, but you want material suppliers. There's actually this company on the left here is run by an amazing ceramicist who is in the process of, who's Scottish and in the process of scaling up his operations. These are recycled glassware and ceramic tiles. Remanufactured electronics, you can get those very easily. You can get recycled paint. Before you look at me like I'm an absolute madman, no, we don't scrape it off the walls. Companies, on average, every person in the UK has about 7 tins of paint normally stored in their garage. They take that, aggregate it, mix it, and then sell it again with a whole range of different mold suppressants, etc., etc. That is my phone, which I'm just going to cancel. Sorry, that was deeply unprofessional. Then there's flooring as well. So we work with the UK's largest flooring reclamation and recycling business. They're an amazing company called Greenstream. They started out because when you got a social house in South Wales, you didn't automatically get flooring, which is clearly scandalous, having kids sitting on concrete in the Welsh winter. They started a service where they lifted carpet tiles and from commercial buildings and then laid them in social housing, and they now do that in a kind of commercial B2B service as well. So something that you guys should be looking at in flooring. And then for us as well, all of this is tied together with circular innovation and design as well. We do free design here, which incorporates all of these services together. So the point, again, to reiterate, is that the capability of the market to deliver should not be in question. The limiting factor for you from a sustainability perspective is the ambitions that you guys have for delivering a sustainable space. I've talked a lot about social sustainability. Circular economy also, it goes hand in hand with creating local social value. At a very practical level, what that means is that if you need to both disassemble and reassemble something, that creates twice the amount of labor, and you can't cost effectively outsource that to China. The circular economy can create meaningful social economic value and should be considered on that basis. We create 6,500 hours of paid living wage employment and work with a range of socially responsible suppliers, like the Merthyr Tydfil Institute for the Blind, featured in that picture there. We've done about 170 projects. This is not new. We can do this at scale, not just in furniture, but across a wider suite of options as well. Again, you don't need to buy new anymore. I have already overrun in terms of my time, so I want to quickly kind of jump to the point, which is about what is my experience about organizing and trying to work with larger organizations, and particularly trying to overcome some of the procurement hurdles that I know can be challenging for suppliers. These are just some tentative thoughts which I would love to be challenged on, and I'll run through them as quickly as possible so I don't run too much over time. And then I've got barriers, and then end positively on enablers. So some of the biggest barriers for us is about tender structure. I know Scott has a kind of a background in the construction industry, and he will know that the construction industry is notorious for having built-in kickbacks. So when I say tender structure, if you're looking at furniture and furnishings, the point is delineate and separate parts of your tender structure when you need them. Separate out furniture and furnishings from the broader build. Otherwise, your fit-out company will try and sell you a furniture package because that's probably where they make the biggest margin. You need to be smart about the way that you structure your tender, because if you just do one and you let if you let the fit-out company set the terms, or the designer build company set the terms for it, they will try and grab as much as possible. And even if you have sustainability aspirations, you will find that somewhere down the line they are most likely to be forgotten or overlooked. If you're thinking about your framework, prescriptive frameworks can be really difficult for circular providers, because what they don't know is exactly the stock they have or the stock they're going to have in a month. We have a range of, like I said, there's 75,000 tons of office furniture that goes to landfill. There's an amazing array of stuff out there. But if you ask us for our specific price of 166 different items, it can be difficult for us to match that. There's a requirement for greater flexibility. I would also encourage you to think about upfront, not just think about lifestyle costing rather than just upfront pricing. That can be a real killer for circular businesses. Another thing in terms of when you're thinking about your tenders, when you need to get new stuff in your buildings, make sure within the tender process there's the capability to use the things that you have creatively. Often the way that's done quite smartly is just by including photos of the existing assets you have and working out how you would integrate them into future projects. Obviously, I would say avoid a race to the bottom in terms of pricing. Buying the cheapest chair you can, most likely made in China, is not going to be a long-term good financial investment. And also make sure you're not measuring the wrong things. Circular economy providers can, in general, report on carbon savings, waste to landfill avoided, and social value created as well. So those are some of the barriers. The enablers, education, just being aware of the fact that there is the market out there to deliver circular and sustainable ambitions. Encourage and leave space for innovation and flexibility within your tender frameworks. If you're too prescriptive, you're most likely going to get the thing that they've always bought, which is new stuff. Prioritize it. Political priorities, kind of political potentially is the wrong word here, but prioritize it with the policies that you create as an institution around waste in the circular economy. Another good point here, which is actually very relevant in the kind of COVID context, is a robust focus on wellness and traceability actually leads to circular outcomes as well. Because if something is, if something's had a previous life, it's most likely off-gassed all of the nasty VOCs in it anyway. And furthermore, circular providers can normally say, yeah, that chair came from Amazon or from James Bond, the James Bond movie Spectre, where we have genuinely taken chairs from before, even though it was the worst kind of James Bond movie, is still quite cool. Whereas normal suppliers of virgin materials can't provide that level of traceability. So asking people about wellness and traceability sits really nicely with the circular economy as well. There's lots of kind of, there's lots of case studies that exist that can help get people behind the ambitions that you guys have. The slides, the pictures here, and this is kind of my final note, is just to kind of reinforce a point, which is that the point is you can create beautiful spaces flexibly. So the image on the top right was given to us by an interior designer. This was their mood board. It wasn't a prescriptive, this is what you need to get here. The photo below is the cafe that resulted actually from that process. You can see that the actual furniture doesn't line up perfectly, but it's totally in keeping with the space, and it's actually beautiful as well. So the point is, when innovation and flexibility is allowed, you can create really amazing outcomes for your spaces as well. We've done we've done some thinking about this stuff, but please do get in touch. My email is my Zoom name, and I can connect you with some really smart people that have been thinking about this a lot. Transport for Wales, for example, did an amazing tender recently, which I thought was probably the most progressive thing I've ever seen. Obviously, there's a huge amount of institutional and incredible expertise in Zero Waste Scotland and Claire and others, but you are not alone out there as smart, progressive, procurement thinking folk around sustainability. So I'll leave it there. And again, to reiterate, my final point is you don't need